There's something about the earliest years of our lives that, in the fog of our memories, we tend to subconsciously long for as adults. A time before society got to us and began to mold us into who it believed we ought to be, rather than who we were discovering ourselves to truly be just before it got its claws into us. Those few years after infancy and before schooling began, where curiosity and imagination guided us through the days of our last taste of mental freedom. Possibly no song embodies this line of thought more than the 1979 smash hit The Logical Song by Supertramp. Like most children, Supertramp frontman Roger Hodgson was fortunate enough to have lived a life of joyful wonder in his earliest years. But, like many boys his age at that time, and in that place, he was soon taken away from his home and sent to boarding school, where he was taught to become a so-called proper member of society. And though it wasn't all bad by any means, it was a change that deeply affected him, as this was when Roger believes his journey to truly get to know himself, and what was truly important to him, was rudely interrupted, put on hold, as he was forced to become an outward cold calculator, rather than an introspective ponderer. To struggle against the societal current in pessimism, rather than flourish in optimistic free thought. To conform to the rigid parameters of the society he was foisted into, to inherit the values it deemed of importance, and to think the thoughts it wanted him to think, and become the person it wanted him to be. Detailed in its opening verse, it's the very event that most inspired the Logical Song, which begins, "When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful, a miracle. It was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees, well, they'd be singing so happily, joyfully, playfully watching me. But then they sent me away to teach me how to be sensible, logical, responsible, practical. Then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, clinical, intellectual, cynical." It certainly sketches a vivid and relatable picture, first perfectly capturing the innocence and wonder of childhood, painting a scene of being young and free, outside among nature and feeling perfectly at one with it, being part of it, being content, being wondrous, being happy, and then the turn, being taken out of that environment and brought to a place that instills in you the need to fear the world, to see it as a cold place, to see yourself as separate from nature, and even adversarial to it. But thankfully, as Roger relates next in the chorus, the specter of that original, childish world of wonder that society did its best to crush all those years ago still miraculously lives in the recesses of the adult mind, no matter how old one gets. And in the mind of the thinker, when the hustle and bustle of the day's rat race comes to a temporary lull, and when the moon's beams find their way in to accompany the silence through the bedroom window, that specter is awakened, and that wonder returns. "There are times," Roger sings, "when all the world's asleep, when questions run too deep for such a simple man." Many, many years ago, when I first heard this song, these were the exact lines that completely hooked me in a very deep, distinct way. I'm sure many people share the view that those times when you're still awake at night and the world is calm and dark, and it almost feels like you're the only one awake on earth, those are sacred times. A time when you can be alone with your thoughts and ponder the deepest questions that life in the social dimension simply doesn't permit you to think. A brief, centered period where we oftentimes evaluate and question the very social order we're temporarily given a break from, and where even deeper questions tend to arise. Variations of, what is it all about? What does it all mean? Why is there something instead of nothing? Is there a purpose? What's my place in all of this? This sacred meditative time is exactly what Roger is describing. "Won't you please, please tell me what we've learned?" he asks before priming his next statement with, "I know it sounds absurd." And then, the all-encompassing question, "Please tell me who I am." In March of 2023, Roger wrote an article for loudersound.com titled "The 10 Best Songs I've Written," in which he explains not only this song's lyrics, but this all-important line's meaning in particular, writing, "The Logical Song was born from my questions about what really matters in life. It was a very personal lyric for me. Throughout childhood, we are taught all these ways to be, and yet we are rarely told anything about our true self. We are taught how to function outwardly, but not guided to who we are inwardly. We go from the innocence and wonder of childhood to the confusion of adolescence that often ends in the cynicism and disillusionment of adulthood. In the logical song, the burning question that came down to its rawest place was, "Please tell me who I am." I think in these modern times, the more complex life becomes, this eternal question becomes even louder, which is why the song continues to strike such a deep chord with people around the world. Continuing with this philosophic theme, Roger takes us into his third verse, picking up right where he left us at the end of the chorus. Here, we hear the societal warnings against daring to think such free thoughts and ask such questions, as Roger writes, "I said, now watch what you say. They'll be calling you a radical, a liberal, fanatical, criminal." The pressure is then put on to fully conform to the social order. "Won't you sign up your name? We'd like to feel you're acceptable, respectable, presentable, a vegetable." To take a step outside of the content for a second, it should be noted that the rhyme scheme and rhythm to these verses are nothing to be glossed over. To set up each stanza with an opening line, and then follow it with a rhythmic list of adjectives, is a style which effectively draws the adult listener in as much as any nursery rhyme does to the infant ear. And this isn't to mention the rhymes themselves, most of which stretching into 3 or 4 syllables. While the first stanza and a half simply rhymes the last syllable of each word, by the second half of the second stanza, Roger has developed a 3-syllable, rapid-fire ABAB structure when he writes the words dependable, clinical, intellectual, cynical, one after the other. He continues this scheme in the third stanzas radical, liberal, fanatical, criminal. And then in the last half of the final stanza, he uses a rapid-fire AAAA scheme, each stretching 3 full syllables of exact rhyming, with acceptable, respectable, presentable, a vegetable. It goes without saying that this is exquisite wordsmithing and rhyming, and again, it should not be overlooked. However, to return to the substance of the lyrics, what message is being said in this last verse is every bit as impressive as its technical makeup, though far more important. In a nutshell, within these stanzas, Roger is outlining the pressure to conform to society's rigid, hive-minded parameters in order to be viewed in an acceptable manner by the rest of its members and institutions. He tells the listener that to question the societal norms and customs is to label one's own self as the other, a radical, a breaker of the unwritten law. Whereas on the other hand, in his own opinion, to bend to those non-independent parameters is to completely surrender one's brain. So then, to the listener, the question is raised as to whether it would be better to think and act freely according to one's own individual will, and thus risk being shunned by society, or to completely conform to the mass and thus risk surrendering individuality and free thought, to become a cog in the machine or a lone scrap outside of it. And these are deep questions, the types Roger speaks of as being dangerous to even ask. Yet, in the last chorus, he reiterates, "But at night, when all the world's asleep, the questions run so deep for such a simple man. Won't you please tell me what we've learned? I know it sounds absurd. Please tell me who I am." From detailing the magic of the earliest days of youth to the disillusionment of a jaded adolescence, and all the way through to the cynicism of adulthood, the logical song's lyrics have resonated in the minds and souls of its listeners now for nearly half a century. Because despite an ever-changing culture, the deepest depths of our existences find a stark commonality from generation to generation. We're a tribal species, and the option to hide and live in the mountains in solitude like Zarathustra is rarely to never acted upon in real, modern life. It's just not what's natural to us. And so we face the dilemmas of conformity versus individuality, being social versus being antisocial, thinking for ourselves versus thinking along with the crowd, being independent versus being part of the hive. And because of that, we all seemingly tend to lose sight of that early path we were on while discovering who we were. and what the world truly is, and what life is truly about, before substitutes for those answers were forced into our psyches, barring that path and banishing those questions to the backs of our minds. It is thankfully then that we have lyrics like these to wake them from their dormancy, even if only for a few minutes while we listen, and to let us know it's okay to ask those questions, and that we're not alone in doing so. But of course, that's just one opinion, and I'd love to know what you think these lyrics are about and what they mean to you, so please write them down in the comments section below. But before you do, first enjoy these 5 additional facts about the Logical song by Supertramp. 1. Released in March of 1979, the Logical song was the lead single to Supertramp's Breakfast in America, their biggest album, which spawned 3 top 20 Billboard Hot 100 singles. 2. A year after its release, Roger Hodgson was honored with the Ivor Novello Award from the British Academy of Composers and Songwriters for the best composition of the preceding year, both musically and lyrically, for the Logical song. 3. During one of the musical breaks, Roger says the word digital directly before a computer-esque sound rings in the background. That sound was actually sampled from a Mattel electronic football game that was popular at the time. To be exact, it was the noise that accompanied a tackle. 4. For a song with such deep lyrics, it sure didn't start that way. Nor do most of Roger's lyrics, as his method of writing usually has him playing a new riff on his keyboard repeatedly and speaking gibberish until something jumps out at him. From singing absolute nonsense, he'd once say, a line will pop up that suddenly makes sense, then another one, and so on. I was doing that when the word logical came into my head, and I thought, that's an interesting word. 5. The Logical song was a very personal piece to Roger, who kept it to himself rather than pitching it to the rest of Supertramp after its completion. I had actually finished the words and arrangements 6 months before I proposed it to the band for the album, he'd say. I didn't think anyone would like it. Luckily, and in hindsight, obviously, they loved it, and the rest is history. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, help out with a like and share before leaving your thoughts in the comments section. And of course, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more lyrical analyses in the future. We'll see you next time.